I'd especially like to thank two of my assistants, Renee and Linda, who helped set up the refreshments, and members of the psychology club, Clara, and my assistant, who helped put together the refreshments. I'd like to also thank my colleagues in social sciences who dipped into their pockets to help finance the refreshments. Professor Brandon, Masiki, Chai, Siam, Simone, Oliver, Kelly. I don't think I've I'd first like to say a little word about Clara, our moderator. She was not always in psychology. She started her career in insurance, as a legal secretary many, many years ago. And from that, moved into insurance, got a broker's license, and worked for a number of years in that field. And I think she realized at some point she didn't want to spend the rest of her life doing that kind of work. And she realized that she was spending a lot of time helping people, talking to people, and picked up a book by Carl Rogers on counseling. And apparently that was a turning point in her life. It made her realize there were things to be learned about what she's interested in. So she came back to school, and now she's a psychology major in her junior year. She's the secretary of the psychology club, a member of the student assistant substance abuse program, and last semester here. What we're going to do tonight is have each of our panelists speak. I think I've got them in order on the board to help you. There will be an opportunity for questions after each person speaks. And one of the major points for tonight is to get you together. So after the formal presentations are over, we invite you for refreshments and a formal conversation with all of our panelists.
Thank you, Dr. Oley. Okay, good evening, everybody. We're going to start right away. We have a panel of 5 speakers, and after we have heard from them, then you will be able to ask them questions. The first speaker is Linda De Jesus. Ms. De Jesus has been affiliated with Medgar Evers since 1977 as an instructor, advisor, director of recruitment and admissions, and counselor. She presently assists and counsels incoming students and provides counseling in the social science division with a major focus on probationary or high-risk students. Coming in? Ms. De Jesus' professional membership includes the Association of Black Psychologists, the National Association for Foreign Student Affairs, the American Association for Counseling and Development, and the Middle States Association for Registration and Admission. Now, I'll now turn this part of the program to Ms. De Jesus.
My class knows I have to stand and move. I'm not one of those people who sit down. I have to stand up and move. I get a chance to open this because I have to kind of have the widest, broadest area. Everybody else came really very specific, but I got a chance to do something that I like doing. And being for Women's History Month really helped me do this because it was courageous voices echoing in our lives. And I thought about talking about the courageous voice echoing in, I think, not only my life, but I think the majority of lives of a lot of black women in our society. And for me, that courageous voice is Sojourner Truth. Sojourner Truth was born Isabella Boomfree, okay? She was the 9th child of a slave family. And for most accounts, most people think about slavery being in the South. But we had as much slavery in the North as we had in the South. And she was from New York. And she lived on a farm, and she was a slave kid. And she stayed, her family stayed with the Bloomfields for most of her first 3 years of her life. When the slave master died, they were sold to his son, or passed on to his son. Life for them was very trying, like it was in most slave situations. And her mother, in her preparation for them to survive in a slave society, taught them one thing, faith. And what she did with them was really interesting. And she had her kids out, and she said to them, remember that you are protected by God. And with that, it gave Isabella a sense of guidance, a sense of security. So no matter what happened, she faced it with this aura that she was being protected by God. So she was fortunate enough to be able to live with her parents for the first 11 years of her life. When she was separated by them after that particular slave master had died. And this is when a lot of the misery really came into her life. She lived, the person who she originally lived with and was raised, she spoke Dutch and not English. And she was beaten brutally with hot iron because she could not pick up the English language fast enough. So this became another one of her strengths, her ability to work with pain and still come out. She never saw anybody as evil. She only felt that they had something to learn. So that was part of her inner being, part of her inner spirit, was the sense that she was protected. It was their problem, it was their sickness, and not hers. And she continued to life this way. After, she said her father was able to assist in getting her from one slave master to another one where her life would not have been so brutal. And then, she stayed with them for years, and she moved on from one situation after another. She lived for 11 years on one particular farm where she fell in love, but her lover came from another farm, and he got brutalized because they were sleeping with each other. And she was forced to marry an older plantation, another slave that was there. She had 4 children. And she stayed with them. She stayed there for the majority of her life when she realized that her slave master had promised her that in 2 years that she would be able to be free and be set free. And when she realized that this may not ever transpire, she did what she had to do as a person to survive. She picked up and she left. She left the husband, she left the kids, and she did what she had to do. And with most humans, they have to do what they have to do to survive. She took the baby, and she took a few pieces of clothing, and she left, not knowing any place where she had no idea where she was going. She left on faith. This is why I like this person, because everything she did based on her faith that she will be all right and that she will be protected. So she did, and she found herself at a Quaker home, and they took her in, and in exchange for housing and boarding, what she did was she did cleaning, and they kept her and the baby. She stayed with them for years until she found out that one of her sons that she left behind was sold off to a plantation in the South. Now here, again, that inner stress came out. She fought to get her son back. And when all the voices that she spoke to, when she hit the brick wall, she decided to sue the southern plantation owners, because at that time there was a law in New York that you could not transport slaves from the north to the south. And she was the first black woman to enter any law case in the whole country. And she did that on just pure courage. I mean, this was something that slaves did not do during that time, during that era, and during that period. So again, she moved out and she started creating. She did other things. When she left the Quakers that she lived with after her son was set free, and they came to New York City. And while working in New York City, she became a social worker. She worked with young women who would have been, I guess, were like prostitutes on the street. And they came to this one place for protection, and she covered the soul, and she worked with humanity. She also joined, while she was there, an organization, and this was a very dynamic kind of personality. She joined this community, a group of people who she felt spiritually felt the same way that she did. What she did not know, after she joined this community, that they were a little bit fanatical, a little bit to the extreme, and she had to break away and leave. But Bites nobody exists. And her her personality was the fact that she created who she wanted to be. She created her own woman. When she was born Isabella, she changed her name again on faith. She decided that if she was to go out and be the speaker, and if she was to speak in God's name, and she was going to speak in terms of humanity, that she did not need to have a slave name. So she sat down, she meditated, she had some conversation with God, and came out and was Sojourner. And that's how she got her name. And with her name, Sojourner. And then she realized she didn't have a last name. Now here I got my name, first name, what am I going to do for a last name? So she went back for a second conversation with God, and came out with Sojourner Truth. And with that, she went, creating who she was. And she created a new name, she created a new image, and she created a strong, powerful woman who went around the country. And most people will know her as a social worker or abolitionist or women's rights. But what they didn't know is that she intellectually spearheaded those movements too in a lot of ways, such as the women's movement. Because in many cases, when they were having these conferences and conventions on women's rights, the white women would kind of fall back if it got too hot and heavy. But she was one of the strong, very vocal type of people who didn't have any problems sitting back because she created what was right. What was right, and that's what she figured out. She didn't care what anybody else had to say. She's also spoke for Tyson. You know, she just had this whole kind of personality that says, I'm me, I'm who I am, and you're going to accept me, and I'm going to say what I have to say. That's why she has a courageous voice. And even in her famous speech, Aren't I a Woman's Citizen? That was when she was sticking out because at that particular conference, the ministers had all spoke first. And what happened was when she came in, they didn't just come, and a lot of the abolitionists did not want her to even speak because there was some concern about whether they allowed her to speak. They would be mixing up the abolitionist movement with the women's movement, and they weren't kind of clear. But Sojourner looked at it that they're both connected and we have to fight for both rights. So she listened, and she listened, and she listened to all the speakers. Then she asked to speak. And that's when she gave her archive moment too. What she was doing, she was answering the questions that the white women suffered from. They kind of got cowed out when the ministers said that women did not need the right to be because they were inferior. And when that was the question that she was responding to. Because she was saying that she told more wrong, and she done as much work as any man, and no man ever opened the door for her. But aren't I a woman too? As she brought out her arms to show that she's still a woman, even though she had to do as much physical work as any man had to do. So that this breaks down that whole concept of inferiority. So she was a very different kind of woman. And she spoke, and the fact that she spoke from faith, and she spoke from heart, and she had her faith, and it kept her going. When I think about her, I think about, when we start talking about a real self-actualized person, like I talk about in psychology, and in the Maslow theory of self-actualization. You know, Maslow said that he only met one person who felt was completely self-actualized. But he also didn't study any black women. Okay, so maybe that was his problem. Okay? And he talks about the hierarchy, but in all his people, he talks about a person who's creative, a person who defines themselves, a person who's able to stand up and not take other people's values, direct their life based on the values that they set for themselves. Well, that's the journey. She went out there and she made her life creating her own personality. So I see her as probably the most self-actualized of people. And one of the other things that he talks about, Maslow talks about, when he talks about self-actualization, all people that he interviewed said that faith was not a strong part of the convictions of a self-actualized person. And I thought that maybe that's why he only met one, because he was interviewing the wrong people. So I see that as, real something that we need to start looking at some of the personalities of these women who are out there before us, because they leave a lot for us to follow by. And I see a lot of sojourners in a lot of the students that come here. A lot of you had to leave home. You had to have decisions. Some had to leave children behind to create the world that they have to live in now. That's the same day and you're going to school at night, aren't you making a lot of sacrifices? And when aren't you also starting to define yourself maybe very different than your mother would have ever defined you? Okay, she said, lots of our parents, they saw us in the classroom at 6 o'clock at night. And be parents who they could die. That's not how they define. So you're redefining yourself. And just by becoming a part of this process. And I've seen that in a lot of the women that they've gone through. And I've seen in the 45 years that they're here, this transformation. And when they leave here, they're a whole lot different than when they came in. And I think that's those courageous voices that we hear as women in our lives. And Sojourner is one of those courageous voices. Okay, ready for your time?
Thank you so much. Wonderful presentation on Sojourner too. I enjoyed learning about her. Okay, at this time we're going to the next speaker who is, just before I go, there is a tablet being circulated. Would you please sign your name and put your address on that? It's very important for us. And also, I have flyers here which I will pass out in a few minutes. Maybe I'll start them now. If you'd like to do so, Patrice Nelson. Ms. Nelson is presently a PhD candidate with City College, City University of New York, Clinical Psychology Program. She has worked as a lecturer and a counselor for the Borough of Manhattan Community College, City University of New York, the Jersey City State College, Baruch College, and Baruch College. Ms. Nelson has also worked as a research assistant at New York University, the Medical Center, and the Psychiatry Department Information and Processing Laboratory. She has been honored as Minority Access to Research Career Scholar and has received the Livingston Welsh Award for Outstanding Achievement in Psychology. Ms. Nelson's professional affiliates include the American Psychological Association, Division of Clinical Psychology, and the New York Association of Black Psychologists. Ms. Nelson? Our topic is Minority Issues in Clinical Training, Crossing the Cultural Divide.
Thank you. I think I'm going to stand, so I won't be that anxious. I think it was my anxiety. Okay, I'll see if my talk will live up to the topic that was announced. What I'd like to begin by talking about is sort of what the struggle is like for clinical students, clinical PhD students, and follow that by a little bit of what the research has said about graduate and professional students, and then talk a little more specifically about the program, the Clinical Psychology Doctor's Program. This might give you a picture of what it's like, the struggle is like. It's 1 o'clock, 1 a.m., and I've been on the telephone for about an hour and a half talking to a friend who's also in the clinical psychology program. And we're sort of showing up each other's decreased emotional resources, depleted resources, and saying that it's going to be okay, we're going to make it through this program, we'll survive. Okay, so that's one aspect of it. Okay, giving each other that emotional and sort of cognitive support. Okay, and everybody else is asleep, and we'd like to get there too, but the pressure is just too much to contend with. So you talk it out with a peer who can sort of understand what it's like to negotiate this program, this experience, what it's like. Okay, it's about third year in the program. Okay, and we've had it. We're saying, forget it. We're going to start drafting our letters, at least for me, our letters requesting a leave of absence. Okay, I'm getting out of this program. I don't need the stress. Let me get on with my life. There must be more to life than, commuting an hour and a half to City College, climbing the hills. Some of you know what it's like to get up there on the #1 train, walking through the park with the alcoholics and the drug
feelers and everything else, and then having to go and deal with this program. So we leave it. So we do it. We have to do that, as you can see. Another sort of experience of the clinical psychology training. The MSA, which is the Minority Student Association of the Clinical Psychology Program, we're beginning to lobby the faculty to make them a little more sensitive to minorities. You know, we're saying, wait a minute, this psychoanalytic perspective just isn't cut it for people who see it. Okay? We need some more active interventions here. So what is the response? I'm a tenured faculty member and I'll keep the course the way I like. Okay? So that's another example of what it's like. A male minority student goes for supervision on the Upper West Side and is told by the doorman that he can't come here. He has to wait outside. Okay, it's not time. He got there too early for supervision, but he can't come in and sit in the lobby. Okay? He must wait outside, even though it's raining. Okay, this is an actual experience of a minority student. And for some of you who know, this has been a current topic about males and black males in particular, what their particular struggle is like. That's just one. That's another talk. That's another talk. So that's one aspect of it. Okay, the other aspect of it is giving a case presentation on transference and counter-transference, meaning, how do you relate to your patients and how your patients relate to you. And the topic goes over very, very well, and you get commended from your peers and from the professor, and you feel good about yourself, and you say, yes, this is, I am, becoming a clinician. Those are some of the small rewards. Okay, that's one reward. You feel, yes, the interventions that I made with this patient, or the interpretations that I made, are sort of on the mark, and you sort of pat yourself on the back, and it feels good. Another aspect of that is coordinating a conference on minority issues, an annual conference given by the Minority Student Association, and the conference is a success, and you feel good about that. So that's sort of the ongoing conflict. That sort of gives an idea of what it's like to be in the program, to be a minority student, to be a woman in the program. So it's, the double bind there, the double minority in a clinical training program, a graduate or professional training program. So there are rewards and there is struggle on the other hand. And how do you come out of this with insanity? That's the question. And intact. And how do you realize the dream? As becoming a professional who can go back into the community and serve your community. You sort of in the admission process, you're asked to write a letter of a personal statement. And you write in this letter that you want to gain this training so that you can be of some value to your community. And so in a sense, if you sort of keep that vision in mind, the way you went in, that's sort of, your guiding purpose in trying to complete this. And not having a defeatist attitude, not giving up. Okay, that's sort of the biggest challenge. They sort of not succumbing to all the institutionalized, the institutional racism, and sort of the own personal struggles, the obstacles that are there for you to jump over, to go through the program. Okay. Why is it important for minority students to pursue professional degrees? Why bother when you can probably just finish, high school and go on into the workforce, have an income enough to survive on? Why is it important to torture yourself like this? First reason is that it provides an avenue for us to enter into leadership and professional roles. Okay, that's the sort of the most the primary reason. Okay, sort of
getting up on the ladder, the professional ladder. The second reason is that we can bring our own cultural experience to bear, on traditional psychology. We can bring maybe a black or an African philosophy to bear on the psychology that's predominantly European. Okay? And a third reason is that we're role models. Okay, we're role models for others who want to enter the field. They stand in front of a class, and at the end of the semester, the students come up to you and say, I think I'd really like to pursue a career in psychology. How do you go about that? How did you get where you were? Help me negotiate with these obstacles. So those are some of the reasons why I'm doing this, and also why some of you are probably doing this, and that's why as black women we should do this. Okay? In terms of statistics, what does the picture look like for minorities, for minorities in general? From the late 60s until the mid-70s, there were indications of a marked increase in minority student enrollment. Okay, there was an increase. However, recent information shows that this trend is reversing. Okay, as you all may know from the 80s with Reagan and his cuts. Okay. ISAC 1985 reports that total black enrollment in graduate schools have decreased 16% between 1976 and 1982. Additionally, by 1982, Hispanic enrollment peaked and has started to decrease like that of black enrollment. However, the problem, of recruiting minorities to graduate school is a critical problem, it's a critical issue. Once enrollment, the attrition rate for minority students is greater than that for non-minority students. Okay, it's fine, we get in, okay, but that first year, that crucial time, the attrition, it's too much. The stress is too much for one thing, as well as the supports aren't there to encourage you to remain. Okay, so a lot of students just drop out of the program. In terms of the City University system, City University of New York system, excuse me, current enrollment in graduate programs in City University of New York has been pretty consistent with national patterns. Based on figures from the Office of Institutional Research and Analysis at CUNY, the fall 86 enrollment is approximately 22,000. That's excluding law school enrollment. Of this present enrollment, ethnic distribution is approximately 72% white, 12% black, 6% Hispanic, 7% Asian, and 1% American Indian or other. To come back then to what the experience is, according to another researcher, he sort of labeled the experience as being isolation, and I can attest to that. I can identify with that notion of feeling isolated, feeling alone, feeling alienated, questioning what am I doing in this program. The results of a study indicate that minority students are isolated. A significantly larger portion of minority sample, as opposed to the non-minority sample, responded that they were really or never asked about socializing with other graduate students. Okay. The same results were obtained when students who asked about engaging in dialogue, professional dialogue with other students or with faculty. Also, graduate students, they were found to be lonely, depressed, and close to tears. That's sort of the constant feeling of being isolated, depressed. Minority students, as compared with non-minority students, describe the faculty as more remote, less friendly, less accessible, and less likely to treat students as adults. they reported smaller percentages of mentor-mentee relationships. Okay, specifically in the clinical psychology doctoral program in City College, there are 2 minority faculty members, 1 man, 1 woman. And in fact, the program director is a minority. Okay? Which we shouldn't make any duplications about. Okay. They received less oral feedback. They reported spending less time with faculty in terms of recreational activities and had fewer opportunities to speak with professors about the field, other intellectual interests and academic matters. They often you find non-minority students having coffee or lunch or playing tennis with faculty members. Okay, whereas minority students who integrated into the program to that extent to feel comfortable enough to sit and have coffee with faculty members or to socialize with them in another way. I mean, I can sort of go on about what the experience is, but in summary, research on minority students suggests that they are isolated in their departments, that separation from departmental members appears to take place in both academic and in non-academic settings. Minority graduate students reported rarely discussing academic matters with their students, other students or faculty. And additionally, results of research indicate that minority graduate students infrequently socialize with peers or faculty outside of the school. So in other words, you go there, you sit in your class, you take your class, you see your patients, you go to supervision, and that's sort of it in terms of interaction with other people. Let me tell you, I'm going to sort of switch gears now and talk a little bit about the program in terms of minority issues of the training and of admissions and of other students and of peer groups. Okay, first of all, the clinical psychology program is up at City College. It's Harlem, it's predominantly minority, and we serve that population, the catchment area, as well as the students who attend the college. Okay, so that's the purpose of the clinic. We serve that population up at City. The orientation of the program, as I said before, is psychoanalytic, meaning you get a lot of courses in Freud and Hartman and a lot of traditional psychoanalytic theories. Said about the faculty is probably about, I'd say approximately 10 full-time faculty members. There's 2 great minorities. The incoming class for my year, which was 85, was about 50% minority. But then again, you shouldn't let that color your impression of the entire CUNY system, because the clinical program is sort of the jewel in the crown of psychology programs, because we recruit and retain the largest percentage of minority students in any other psychology program. And then in general, the graduates tend to sort of graduate more minority students, which is twice the national average. But I mean, yes, those statistics sound good, but it's still not enough to really address some of the issues. So like I was saying, my incoming class was 50% minority. Usually the incoming class is about 15 students, and so we had 15 or 16 students. So for that year, the year that I came in, it was a good year. And some of us, most of us still keep in touch. We still are in touch with each other. Another issue in training is the admissions. How do you get into this program? That's the question. How do you get into this clinical psychology doctoral training program? Well, first of all, you come to undergraduate school, you have a decent GPA, you have an interest in psychology, probably an undergraduate psychology degree, but not necessarily. And you take the GREs, which is the graduate record exam, which is a standardized test, which everybody knows. most of the minority students who come into the program, at most, I should say most, it probably reflects the national average in terms of how they score relative to other people coming into the program. So that's one hurdle that you have to get over, which is very. You present yourself in terms of the application, and you say something about what your interests are, your personal statement, and where you're supposed to, to go in terms of your professional development. So then you go through an interview process, which in which you're interviewed by a faculty member and by a student. And often both these people are non-minority people that you're interviewed by to gain entrance to this program. After the interview process, you wait a couple more weeks, and then you're called to say you've been accepted, or well, usually the rejection letter something later. But usually you're called to say whether you're accepted into the program. And at that point you're very, very excited because, here you are on your way to becoming this doctor. It's great, you see the whole world before you and all the good things you're going to do, and, you're going to change the world, and you're going to cure everybody's neuroses, and everything's going to be fine. And then maybe first semester, maybe second semester, the reality sort of hits you across the face. Wait a minute, this is too much, it's too much on a day-to-day basis to deal with, other students, faculty, the course content, supervisors that don't address your experience, that don't address you, it's not culturally relevant most of the time, and you have to find your way within that to come out with your PhD. So that's one of the struggle of being a student part of it. In terms of the training, the clinical training program, as I said, we see students who are attending city college, and the process of coming into the clinic, filling out an application form, requesting therapy, that's the procedure, and then you're assigned a patient. Okay, by second year you begin seeing patients on a full basis. So you come in and you fill the form out and you're assigned a therapist. Most of the students who come into the clinic are minority students. Most of the patients that the minority therapists see are minority. So they match minority to minority. It's seldom that minority students are assigned non-minority patients. That's the training. You're trained to see minority patients. That's the training. You can request a male patient. May I have a male patient? I'd like to see a male patient. I've been working with female patients, and because of my training, I would like to see a male. Often, the non-minority students come in and are very upset that they've been assigned a minority therapist. They request a non-minority therapist. Okay? So that's the training. How do you go about changing this sort of thing? Still trying to figure it out. And I'm probably running out of time because I can talk to you forever and ever about it. Now, I don't want to seem totally cynical about it. It's not totally negative, the experience. It's certainly a learning experience, it's a growing experience. You come out of this program transformed. You come out different from the way you go in. Very, very different. The training is excellent. The supervision is excellent. But you have to find your own way through it. Okay? You have to get out of it what you need. You have to take courses that the graduates sent off by other faculty in other disciplines that, give you what you want out of it. Okay? In graduate school, it's more or less up to you at any rate. But in terms of the curriculum, you have to sort of make it your own. Because there's a lot of opposition to change. Okay, and like everything else, it doesn't come without a struggle, with fight. And what I'm going to urge you all to do is to get through undergraduate school, apply to graduate school, and the more of us that get in there, the better. That's really, really important. Get in there and stay in there so that we can make the change. Okay, and that's what's really important. And the challenge, you get through it, and you survive. And I'm standing here to tell you that you can survive. Okay? That's it.
Did I see a hand? I want to know if we're going to have a question and answer after, or, after everything, or we decided to do it after. Okay, if you would just hold your questions, don't forget it. Thank you, Ms. Nelson. Our next speaker is Vanessa Bing, or Professor Bing, as I know. Ms. Bing is a PhD candidate at the City University of New York. She has lectured at the College of New Rochelle, the Borough of Manhattan Community College, Marymount Manhattan College, Jersey City State College, New York University, Medgar Evers College, and Baruch College, where she is presently an adjunct counselor. She has an extensive background in clinical administration and counseling, psychodiagnostic testing, research, and consulting. She has received a number of awards and honors, including Outstanding Young Woman of America. Ms. Bing's professional affiliations include the American Ortho-Psychiatric Association, American Psychological Association, New York Association of Black Psychologists, National Association of Black Psychologists, and the Association of Black Women in Higher Education. Ms. Bing, her topic is racial identification and professional development. Thank you. I see a couple of familiar faces who have been my time before, so hello to you. Is the microphone? Racial identification and professional development. What does that mean? I wanted to share with you something that happened with me last summer. The latter part of the summer, I was asked to participate in a panel discussion that was hosted by Emerge Communications. There's a new magazine called Emerge that some of you may be familiar with. And they wanted to gather a group of people together, young black professionals who started their career or who've only been at their career for a short time, to talk about the issues that they're facing. And they wanted to contrast that to some of the issues that our predecessors experienced, people who are roughly 20 years older than us, to find out, have things changed? Are they the same? Are they different? How different? What are the issues that have come up? And I immediately accepted. I thought that would be a wonderful opportunity to dialogue with people from different disciplines and talk about what's happening, what's not happening, what the problems we all foresee facing. And what I learned was a number of different things. It was enlightening. It was a little sad. It was discouraging. Some of you may have come across the article within the November '89 issue. But what I found, even more than what the article pointed out, is that there are a lot of professionals, young professionals, black, minority people pursuing aspirations in a lot of different areas where we have typically and historically been denied access, and people are having real problems. And we're talking people from your Ivy League schools, the Harvard, the Yale, people from City University, but people who are very well credentialed.
masters, MBAs, PhDs. But yet and still, there is this struggle. What is the struggle? So I wanted to begin today talking about some of the issues and the challenges facing the minority professional. Now, just as a backdrop, I just want you to have an understanding of what the numbers are like in different professions. In New York City alone, in the area of banking, only 10 black executives have achieved the senior rank of New York's top 20 commercial banks. 10. All of New York City. In the area of law, only 21 black attorneys have made partners in the city's 25 largest firms. 21. Law schools are churning out huge numbers, but 21 have only made it to the top. And many of those have made it through by virtue of being with the firm for numbers and numbers and numbers of years. It's not like they came and they were offered partnership. Okay? In architecture, New York accounts for a little more than a dozen registered black architects. Okay? With respect to education, less than 11% of faculty members are minority descent. From 1977 to 1985, there was a drop in minority faculty. Okay. In 1977, out of 449,210 entire faculty, college faculty, full-time faculty across the country, only 19,000 were black. That was 4.4%. Some 6,000 were Hispanic. That was 1.5%. Asian and Pacific Islanders made up roughly 2.7%, and American Indians 0.2%. Now, those numbers were low in 1977, but in 1985, almost 10 years later, the numbers dropped, particularly for blacks. The number dropped to 4.2% for black faculty, full-time faculty members. Okay, and if you consider, this is again at all colleges, universities, at black representation on faculties in predominantly white institutions is only 1.8%. So in that 4.2% figure I gave you, we're talking about black faculty at predominantly historically black colleges, city university systems, where it probably has a greater representation of minority faculty. Okay, so the numbers are very, very low. Okay, so how do we interpret these numbers? As a professional, if I'm on the faculty, and I know that I'm one of, 4.2%, what do I feel? That I'm one of the talented 10, but I'm that special person? Okay, understand a couple of things. There are many people of color who are who carry some kind of illusion that they are this special, unique person. That, I got my PhD from Harvard. I went to Yale undergraduate, so, they didn't hire me simply because I was black. They hired me because I had all of these wonderful credentials. So race doesn't mean anything. I call that the colorblind class. I call that the black person who is racially unaware. I see that as very problematic, and I'll come back to that in a second. Another way we can interpret that, I'm one of few people on this, one of this 4.2%. I'm isolated, right? I'm alone. Okay, I have no people who I can turn to, people who I feel racially identified with, because the numbers are just too low. And so I'm going to experience
really a real sense of isolation. Okay, so that's an issue that comes up repeatedly for black professionals. Many black professionals find that they have real difficulty negotiating who they are with respect to what institution they belong to. Okay? How many of you have heard of someone being referred to as too black? Well, I don't want to go into this law firm. I can't be too black. I don't want to come across as this militant. I don't want to offend anyone. Okay? So, what does that mean, being too black, too Hispanic, too Puerto Rican, too Dominican, too something? That's something that we're holding somewhere in this part of our head. And then we go home, go back to our communities, provided that we are still very much attached to the community, and we're black, we're truly black. We want to be down, and we want to be totally accepted. We want to be a role model. For some people, we are a role model. For others, we've sold out. We work for that white law firm. We work for that Ivy League school when we should be at the community college that needs them. Okay, so there is a issue of, it's been called bicultural stress, living between two different worlds. Now, that's not a new phenomenon by any means. Several years ago, this issue has been a part of black culture. I just wanted to read a quote of W.E.B. Du Bois. He was talking about how blacks, how they play this, they have this dual role. He says, one never feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unrecognized strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body. Okay? Many black professionals today are negotiating and trying to deal with this issue of being two different people. How they present in their work environment, how they present when they're away from their work environment. And that can translate into a number of different things. Is my attire appropriate? If I wear my hair braided, can I wear my hair braided? In academic settings, I think instructors find they have a little bit more freedom, certainly, than people who work on Wall Street. You would certainly get a response if you came in with your Kente cloth attire, your hair in locks, very short afro has just been accepted. I guess it's more fashionable now. But certain things are still not accepted. So those are the people who come in environments and try to decide, well, can I be me, or who is me? Who am I? Do I have to change my whole look to fit in? Many blacks have decided that there is a ceiling when it comes to how far that they can go, from predominantly white institutions. You will find many blacks in the area of law and banking are leaving the institution to set out on their own ventures, feeling that that is truly the only way that they can make it. And I want to come back a little and just talk about specifically psychology and the role a black can take up in this profession. Okay? Some of you are psychology majors, some of you are thinking about pursuing careers in psychology, and I think it's important for you to have a sense of what you're going to have to struggle with. You heard Ms. Nelson talk about the training aspect of your professional development. Well, the issues don't stop there. As soon as you get out into your professional environment,
I labeled that earlier as my colorblind syndrome. By virtue of negating color, you are basically just closing your eyes to the society that we live in, the institutional structure. We're closing our eyes to institutional racism. We're closing our eyes to the dominant structure of society that has been allowed to exist for so many years by saying that color doesn't matter. But understand that this is a defense. Of course color matters. Of course there's a difference. There's a difference in culture. There's a difference between African Americans and Afro-Caribbeans. Of course there's distinction. But to close your eyes to that, you just negate it. So now look at color is to deny racism. And many people will do that. And many blacks themselves will do that in order to feel comfortable in their work environment. Well, let me just say something about psychology. Okay? Psychology. Some of the great writers in psychology have written about blacks and other minorities. Okay? There was a psychiatric argument in favor of slavery that suggested that black people were more likely to experience mental disturbances if they were set free. Okay? Blacks were often described in the literature as childlike, a primitive race, and in need of domination. Okay? G. Stanley Hall, who was the first president of the American Psychological Association, referred to black people as a primitive race in a state of immature development. Okay? In the Psychoanalytic Review, which is the first psychoanalytic periodical in English, founded by William Allen White, black people were depicted as a race at a relatively low cultural level who during its years of savagery has learned no lessons in emotional control. Okay? And I can go on and on and on. There you can find readings of Carl Jung, you will find some discriminatory remarks. Loretta Bender, who is a pioneer in child psychiatry, referred to the capacity of laziness in blacks, the special ability to dance. Eric Erickson, you all know who Erickson is, right? Yeah. He wrote in 1950, Negro babies often receive sensual satisfactions which provide them with enough oral sensory surplus for a lifetime, as clearly portrayed in the way they move, laugh, talk, and sing. This sensory treasure helped to build a slave identity, mild, submissive, dependent, somewhat querulous, but always ready to serve with occasional empathy and childlike wisdom. So this is like the literature in psychology. Right? So, I'm coming into this profession knowing that it's embedded on racism. If you dig deep enough, you don't even have to dig that deep. You will find it. Okay? But I choose this profession, knowing that it's based on it, but also knowing that it's my job to do something and make it useful so that I can serve my people. Okay? So my struggle is going to be, in an institution that teaches, something else, telling them, well, I think this is important, and I think it's important to look at race, issues around skin color, issues around, it's the same in law, it's the same in banking, it's the same in business. If you want to advocate for a certain position, you put yourself in a really precarious position. Other people don't want you to make waves.
Stop making waves. Stop bringing up that black stuff. Right? And these things can continue throughout your professional development. But I don't say that, again, because we don't want this to be like a heavy-handed talk, feeling that there is no hope. Well, sure there's hope. You know, I enjoy what I do, and I enjoy being in a position to educate others, not just black students, white students, Hispanic students, all students. Because these are the people who are coming in, and they have, you know, they may have some distorted or preconception, misconception about a lot of things when it comes to people of color. How much time is that? There was a couple points I want, oh, okay, right. I want to bring up before we end. In terms of the various challenges that face us, I jotted down what I thought were just a number of different questions that the black professional in any area will often have to ask themselves. Given that racism does exist, and I say that's a given, okay, you have to ask yourself, what kind of limits are imposed on my life? Just how integrated do I want to be? Okay. What is my responsibility to the so-called black underclass or minority underclass? Okay. How do I teach children to navigate what is very much still a white world? How can I be a role model? How do I deal with white expectations of what a black professional should be? And more than that, how do I deal with black expectations? I just want to share a couple of things. I mean, to be a black professional, it's in some ways, I don't like to use this word, but in some ways it can be conceived as a burden, because you're not just doing your job. In many ways, you're representing all your people. And a lot of blacks resent that. You know, they don't want to be the expert on all black. I mean, if I grew up in Westchester, I don't know squat about what it's like to be poor and black. And many blacks find themselves in that position. If they're the only person on their job, they'll say, well, tell me, what is it like, or what is this taste like? How long does it take to braid your hair? Or, you know, you'll get these questions before you. You may be in a position to answer them, you may not. But you may resent those questions being put before you, like you are the expert. But at the same time, you do become representative of a group of people, like it or not. Okay? The other issue that's a very sensitive, kind of sticky issue is how other blacks respond to blacks in positions of power. I was reading an article where a black executive spoke of her secretary. She left her secretary notes asking her to take care of this, 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 and this. And her secretary came back to her and said, you know, I resent your leaving me these notes and say, please. And the reason why that came up is because there is some comfortability that comes up. You know, it's nice when you see someone, a role model, someone black, someone Latino before you. And in some ways, you can become comfortable, and in some ways you should, to feel that you can approach this person. But there is sometimes a real thin line. When I was teaching at a college, when I started teaching, I had a couple of students, black students, who, was trying to, you know, do a number on me, trying to get over on me, and knew that, you know, it would be cool. It would be cool. I you know, like to relate to them. You know, and that was a struggle for me, because I do want to be a role model. I want them to know that they can come to me, but at the same time, well, let's be serious, okay? All of this is to say is there are so many different types of responsibilities that the black professional has. And how do you take up this role and, you know, maintain your sense of integrity of who you are, how racially identified you are, you know, within a a need to fight so hard. You know, so the issues around your Africanness may not be a big deal. But that's not been so. So just briefly, now to take us 1 minute to go through this. Charles Thomas was the first president of the Association of Black Psychologists, and he believed that black people once suffered something called nigromachi, which he defined as a condition where a person is confused about his self-worth and depends upon white society for self-definition. And I quote, "Inherent in this concept of approval is the need to be accepted as something other than what one is. Gratification is based upon denial of self and a rejection of group goals and activities. The driving force behind this need requires Afro-Americans to seek approval from whites in all activities, to use white expectations as the yardstick for determining what is good, desirable, or necessary." Okay, so basically we're using a different standard to decide our measure of worth. And he felt that nigromachi is overcome by seeking a racial identity, and that there are various stages that a person goes through. The pre-encounter stage, which is where you don't really see a big deal about, racial identity. You're colorblind for all intents and purposes. Then there's the encounter stage, where all of a sudden you are approached with certain situations where you realize, yeah, I'm black. They're telling me that I'm black, that I'm Hispanic, and that I'm Latino. And that makes you very vulnerable and perhaps more open to discussing issues around your ethnicity. Then there is an immersion stage, where you become totally immersed into your culture, and then you begin to adopt all the values, but you do it in a really heavy-handed kind of way, like you're very anti-white, as opposed to being pro-black. And I make that distinction. Then there is an immersion stage where you come out of that total immersion, but where you're able to accept your blackness with a sense of pride and not with so much anger and defensiveness. Okay? And lastly, the internalization and commitment. And recent studies that have been done have shown that for people who work in corporate America, white corporate America, they feel that that model holds true. That many people who have been hired by the major companies, IBM, etc., they come in feeling that they came in based on their qualifications and so forth, and not because they're black, so they don't necessarily think about the color issue. Then they encounter a couple of things, then they become angry, and until they finally realize where they are. These are people who will probably ultimately leave and go into their own business. So all of this, what I just hoped to present, I presented a lot of different things, but I just wanted to do was get you all in mindfulness. Think about a number of issues that will confront you as a black professional, because you all will be professionals in your own right. You will be a role model, okay? And we need you, so we should be there. But understand that there are so many things that you will have to face that will feel very difficult at times. And that's why it's important to stay in touch and stay connected with people who are like-minded. Networking is one of the most important things that black professionals can do. The Association of Black Psychologists, if you're a psychology student, you should be joining now, okay, so that you have that connection, the people who will help you in your professional development. I think as people of color, we're capable of a lot. There's going to be some point, we talk about it in the 21st century, where quote-unquote minorities are going to be the majority. So in terms of whether it's education, business, we're going to really be needed in the workforce. We're a poor
Oley. Okay. Dr. Oley works in the area of stress management. She has appeared on the NBC Frank Field show in a discussion on stress and distress. She has an extensive background in research, workshops, presentations, and has received several awards and honors. Dr. Oley has been a full-time professor at Brookdale Community College in Lincroft, New Jersey since 1977, and she also works under the supervision of someone who has their own practice. Dr. Oley.
I thought I was going to see 4 of my old students because I've been an adjunct professor at Medgar since 1986, but actually I only saw 2. I guess I am a product of what you probably identify as bicultural stress. I'm from the Caribbean, and even there I was stressed. I was born in Montreal. I grew up in Antigua. I did high school in the British Virgin Islands, and I went back to Antigua, and then I came to the United States. I'm married to a Nigerian, so there you have a transatlantic. I've been teaching for 13 years at Brookdale Community College in New Jersey, which is primarily a white institution. I have been an adjunct here at Medgar since 1986. I also, the practice that was mentioned, she didn't get my resume till today, so she did a great job, is basically a white practice. A colleague of mine, a white female, recognized my talents and said, you must do this, you must do this, and that for a long litany of others, and she just loves my work, so I helped her find. Meanwhile, I also am at the Center for Problems of Living at Amsterdam Avenue on 145th Street every Friday, where I work with adolescents. So I am split right down the middle. Okay, I guess I am one of those blacks who have had to deal with the white community and deal with the issue of integration. When I first went out to Lincroft, it was the day of the blackout that I had my interview with the New York blackout, and they were just amazed when I showed up. I had to audition for the teaching position. I was thrown into a forum where the interviewers, one was black. The interviewers were embedded in the classroom, and I had to do a lecture which had been sent to me 2 days before that, and then they identified themselves after I had done the lecture, and then you had the interview. I had decided that this was an audition and this was, going to be a good acting opportunity for me, so I wore red and white and I gave them a song and a dance. So when I got it started out at the forum, is this your specialty? Oh, wasn't that wonderful? And the interview, of course, was easy after that. But I had to be strong. I had to be strong. If I didn't rise to the challenge, it would have been downhill after that. I mean, imagine going into an interview with people who were just being messed up. I mean, it would have been just awful. I remember that first lecture well because after I paused with a physiological psychology, after I paused the question, first question I got was, are you from Boston? And I know that every spring when I get students from all over the country, because spring semester pick up a lot of students from all over the place, that question gets repeated. People are more fascinated by my accent than apparently. They have questions about who I am. Why are you doing this? And, how are you doing this? And that sort of thing. I prepared a presentation today which I think is longer than but I think, in all fairness to myself, I probably ought to just get on with it. But I think I wanted to just tell you a little bit of who I am so you can better understand some of the things where I'm coming from. I started off with a quote. She had nothing to fall back on. Not maleness, not whiteness, not ladyhood, not anything. A profound declaration of her reality she may well invent. That's from Toni Morrison. The above quote from Toni Morrison captures eloquently the focus of my presentation is significant to me because it affords me the opportunity to address publicly and privately critical issues that help define my life in situ, day after day, and to which I often pay minimal, explicit attention, but which nonetheless have a focus of covert, much covert energy. These issues are none other than racism and sexism. The position that I have adopted for this year is that racism and sexism are both worldwide phenomena and perennial problems. Often we limit our perspectives to the American scene to the end that this problem seems unique to us and defines our existence more than it does anyone else, anywhere or at any time. And this I submit to be entirely unfair. I am here today in part because of the racist conditions that exist in third world countries. Peripheral Capitalism and Underdeveloped Ideas. Anybody know that book? It should be upstairs in the library. It's by Dr. Henry, who's now at Brown University, and my brother was sociologist. And in there he analyzes very carefully the peripheralization of capitalism in third world countries. Brauwelsen identified the invisible man. One can also identify invisible nations. Currently, the systematic condition of exclusion probably reaches its most oppressive peak in South Africa. This broad perspective can either strengthen or weaken one's resolve. And it is at this point that a further revision of Toni Morrison's quotation becomes necessary. She has nothing to fall back on, not maleness, not whiteness, not ladyhood, not anything but her humanity. Out of the profound desolation of her reality, she must invent herself. This brings me full circle to the title of my presentation, Humanistic Approach to Psychology, Embracing Issues Beyond Truth. As a student of human nature, I have to recognize a place where everyone is first and foremost, where everyone is primarily a person before race and gender, secondary issues enter. One danger of focusing too narrowly on racism and sexism in the USA is that we claim it for our own. Certainly one obvious strategy of oppressors everywhere is to cause there to be an illusion that one or another group of persons is less than human, or is somehow unable to express their humanity. A condition that I submit to be, at some level, impossible. A condition also that cannot be the worst in these United States. I will attempt to make the racial and sexist problems as they impact on Americans who are also black a best-case scenario. I will attempt to show that despite theoretical views that emphasize the darker side of human nature, a humanistic approach is a real option that not only awaits us, but cries for adoption. Current events continue to shape and develop my professional life, creating at times an acute awareness of how little there is to fall back on, to use Toni Morrison's method. I refer you to nothing more scientific and nothing less popular than last week's New York Times Science Times article. As a therapist, Freud fell short of solid science. I quote, "A new historical research in Sigmund Freud is challenging the reputation of the founder of psychoanalysis. New revelations depict Freud, who seems at times mercenary, who is at times mercenary and manipulative, who sometimes claims cures where there were none, and who on occasion distorted the data of his cases to prove his theoretical points. Judged by current knowledge and standards, it is a Freud who at least at once stepped over the line into malpractice." Although Daniel Goleman, the New York Times writer, states, new revelations do not demean Freud's brilliance. They do not necessarily mean that by the standards of his day he lacked integrity, but they portray a Freud far more prone to human failings than legend has allowed. Even so, the findings have little to do with today's practice of psychoanalysis, a branch of psychotherapy that still applies Freud's ideas in seeking insights into the cause of emotional conflict. Psychoanalysis itself has gone through more than 80 years of refinement and evolution. Its basic premises accepted even among many of those therapists who are not themselves psychoanalysts. I submit that these allegations strike at the very foundations of this line of thinking and theorizing. Additionally, recall that this Euro-American model of mental health services is a model rooted in illness and abnormality, where these conditions are a result of where these conditions are always a result of a condition within a person and and less a function of the society that may be injurious to their mental health. If psychoanalysis remains a respected tradition nevertheless, then prejudicial treatment of Americans who are also black can scarcely come as a surprise. There can be no doubt that the intent to help people rather than to ostracize has been a major step forward, and the intent to listen rather than to judge is another major breakthrough. But we also come up against the thorny problem of capability. Given the documented manipulations of Freud himself, can his disciples hope to do much better? The subjective component of therapy is renewed. What may be important, however, is what I have long called the arrogance of psychology. Freud's assumption, for example, that he has cured when in fact he could not. 100 years of refinement notwithstanding, psychology today is still largely a system of descriptions and classification, instead of reliable treatment procedures, as a look at the psychiatrist-psychologist Bible, the DSM-3R, will indicate. What is given as least lip service, however, is that people and their disorders, that there are people and their disorders. This is of significance because while mental health professionals are responsible for treating a disorder, they're not responsible for making it perfect. That responsibility remains within the purview of each individual. While these two aspects can and often interact and sometimes overshadow the other, it is critical to recognize this differential responsibility. However, some methods of treatment and thinking, in addition to their question of a rate of cure, also make it more difficult for a person in treatment to be a person, or even those out of treatment to be self-respecting. I refer, for example, to the application of Freud's concepts to Americans who are also black by psychiatrists Greer and Hart. Summations like black women have a nearly bottomless well of self-depreciation into which they can always drop when depressed. And probably still worse, the betrayal of American men who are also black as hopeless and powerless victims of a society really don't help a great deal. Without overdeveloping this issue, let me say that as impotent as psychology is, there are options within the business. Freudian way of thinking polarizes male and female, as well as black and white, middle class and lower class, etc. It is important for Americans who are also black to realize that the adoption of this way of thinking will most often support the promotion of these false dichotomies. A more humanistic or decidedly universal acceptance of humankind in all the complexity and diversity that has always existed and will always exist stands a more realistic chance of spawning a treatment modality that allows people to recognize commonalities between them and all others, and also provide a genuine basis for respect of persons who are different. The theories of Carl Jung, with all due respect to you, with their cross-cultural emphasis, with their cyclical and eternal themes, with their recognition of male and female within each person, and their resourcefulness of humankind, provide a much more humanistic approach with which therapists can understand themselves and others. Additionally, the traditional humanistic theories of Maslow, Rogers, Proust, etc. also provide a framework within which people are self-determining, self-regulating, and self-reliant. Consistent development of this line of thinking sensitizes persons to these qualities in each other and nurtures the development of these potentialities. Ethnic, racial, and gender differences can be balanced by theories that encourage mental health professionals to recognize our common humanity and our shared destiny. The waning of the Freudian mindset does provide Americans who are also black with another opportunity to recover their humanity. While humanity, as I asserted earlier, is an existential condition that cannot be bestowed upon or taken away from any group or race by any other group or race, one's experience of one's humanity is also partly symbolically defined. Any real adaptation and implementation of a genuinely humanistic approach to psychology means also a recognition and appreciation of what women have contributed, want to contribute, and have yet to contribute. The discipline of psychology, like a large society, remains male-dominated, and we have suffered and continue to suffer because of it. The recognition of the role of women will not only release much more powerful energy into the struggle, but it will also foster a more humanistic understanding of who we are and where we are going. Paula Giddens has documented well the profound contributions of the black woman in her seminal book, When and Where I Enter. She also points not only to the non-recognition with which black women are often faced, but also the misrepresentation. This is identified as coming from two sources: psychological and sociological literature, most notably the Daniel Moynihan Report, The Negro Family, the Case for National Action. This suggested that the success of black women, rather than racism, was the root of the black person's problem. And the attitude of black men towards black women, which came from the writings of Cleaver, Baraka, and others, where the black woman was blamed for the problems of the race and for the strong attraction of black men to the white woman and the low self-esteem of black men, and so on and so forth. It is important to note that non-recognition and misrepresentation of females is not limited to Americans who are also black. Caucasian males rendered their females helpless before they supposedly placed them on a pedestal. Power and achievement, rather than being exclusive masculine traits, as the male myth is one to suggest, are gender-free traits that must be adopted in response to realities of one's circumstances. Males, Caucasians, and black, for reasons that are far from clear, are too often caught up in aggressive and nihilistic motives and actions. Thus, the female-headed household in black communities identified in the Moynihan study are commonplace today in Caucasian communities. Women, regardless of color, are always left to pick up the pieces and bind up the wounds. Additionally, as is so well documented in When and Where I Enter, black women have not only been the mainstay of slave and post-slavery communities, but through the churches and various labor unions built the collective strength to be a decisive force in times of active struggle. Caucasian women gained much strength Caucasian women gained much of their strength and organizational skills from black liberation groups, in which they were initially motivated to serve. Oppressive strategies created by the Caucasian male community, which affected Caucasian females, and needless to say black males and females, more detrimentally led to a different set of issues among Caucasians and black females. What I've attempted to show is that this tangle of racism and sexism, women, black and Caucasian, have not only made most or many of the positive initiatives, but implemented them and sustained them also. The American woman who is also black, however, by dint of circumstance, historically has had a much greater challenge, and above all has risen time and time again to the occasion. It is indeed a joy to be a part of this truly humanistic tradition, and say with Anna Julia Cooper in 1982, only the black woman can say, when and where I enter in the quiet, undisputed dignity of my womanhood, without violence, without suit, without special patronage, there, then and there, the whole race enters with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Oley. Okay, our last speaker this evening is Dr. Gwendolyn Rogers. Dr. Rogers is an Afrocentric clinical psychologist. She completed her BA at Fordham University and her doctoral studies at the Institute of Advanced Psychological Studies at Adelphi University. Her doctoral dissertation was on perceived racism, identity, and the self-esteem of adolescents and youth of African descent. Dr. Rogers is currently a senior psychologist at Harlem Hospital and an adjunct professor at Fordham University, where she currently teaches Afrocentric psychology. She also teaches at the College of New Rochelle, DC 37 campus, and has lectured at various colleges and universities. Dr. Rogers is well known here at Medgar Evers College. For several years, she functioned as a consultant and and then the SAS psychologist for the Center of Women's Development. Dr. Rogers helped to design the Single Parents Project, which existed here for 2 years. Let's see, she also organized the African Women and People of African Descent. Okay, her affiliations, her professional affiliations include the Association of Black Psychologists, Black Women in Higher Education, National Black Child Development Institute, African Heritage Studies Association. Dr. Rogers is also a priestess of Obatala in the Yoruba religion. Her topic for tonight is Afrocentric Psychology and the Psychology of Africana Women. Dr. Rogers?
Before I start, I'd like to do two things. I'd like to add Sister Clara, who did a wonderful job. I just gave her that piece of paper. Scribble on it. I would like to add a couple of things, however, because I think it is very important for us to function as role models. And as an African Caribbean woman, I think it's quite important for us to put out the things that we do. One of the things that I do at Harlem Hospital, I teach psychiatrists who are residents. I teach them assessment of minority children, and I teach them cultural psychology. I'm also on the committee to design the clinical psychology internship at Harlem Hospital, which is a brand new internship. So if there are any students who are looking for internships, I don't know if there are, please feel free to see me. We also have an externship program, and I supervise externs. I will be supervising an internship as well. Before I start to give you some comments from the notes that I prepared, I'd like to put some names on the board. I think it's very important for us to leave these types of gatherings with a sense of empowerment. And we have bandied about the names of various races and various Eurocentric people who've played whatever roles, some positive, some negative. But I think it's important for us to have a sense of the kind of work our sisters and brothers are doing in the field of psychology. So I would like to give you these names as people that you can research. This brother used to be called Donald Allen. His name now is Ajibo. And he's an Afrocentric psychologist who does work on the Black personality and has designed a scale that is very interesting. I'm sure you're all familiar, many of you are probably familiar with Wade Noble, who has written extensively on the philosophy of Afrocentric psychology, from which I'm going to draw tonight, some of my comments from his work. Dr. Noble's also edited the hard to get but well worth looking for book called Black Psychology. And let's see, who else is there? Bobby Wright, who wrote Bobby Wright is the IA, he's no longer with us. He wrote a book called The Psychopathic Racial Personalities. There's Naeem Akbar, who has done a number of things, but one of the things that Dr. Akbar has written that is quite interesting is a little book called Chains and Images of Psychological Slavery. And there's a sister by the name of Linda Myers, who wrote this book called Understanding an Afrocentric Worldview, Introduction to an Optimal Psychology. And then there's another sister who I just met her at a cross-cultural psychology conference at Teachers College last week, and I would not have mentioned her. I would have forgotten to mention her, except that one of the sisters who did a presentation here tonight referred indirectly to some of her work, and her name is Janet Helms. Janet Helms is an absolutely brilliant sister. I don't use that term too lightly because, these words get thrown around. But Janet Helms is in work. She's well known in the cross-cultural psychology field for doing work on racial identity formation. And she's the steps that the sister delineated here has been expanded by Dr. Helms. And I'm not sure what year those steps came about, but her current research is focusing on white racial identity formation. And the reason this is important is because, we talk about people doing treatment with black folks or with people of color. And one of the very important pieces of research that is coming out of the work of Dr. Helms and some other people like Robert Carter, Teachers College, a whole host of other folks. One of the things that's very important is that it's not just a matter of what color our skin is. It's a matter of how we feel about our ethnic and racial identity that determines how helpful or how destructive you are in dealing with people. Okay, there are other names, but those are the ones that came to my head. Now, what I'm not going to do, before I say what I am going to do, I'd like to say what I'm not going to do. I am not, even though I'm going to talk about Afrocentric psychology as opposed to Euro-American psychology, I am not going to dissuade you from coming into psychology. How many of you are psychology majors here in this room? Wonderful. How many of you are thinking about it? Oh, look at that. Great, great. Okay. It is very important for us to study and know something before we think that we can change it. When I was going to Fordham during the 70s, there was a little thing that went around that if you were truly black, you did not study psychology because psychology was thought to be oppressive, and indeed it was. And then, a little later, along came the resurgence of the women's movement, and that notion was again bandied about. If you were truly a woman, truly a sister, you did not study psychology. I had people say to me in both camps, how could you? How could you do that? How could you identify with those people? Well, sisters and brothers, before we can do anything about anything, we have to understand the nature of what it is. So that's one rationale for us going into psychology. I'll talk a little bit about that at another point. I am also not going to project, even though I want to refer to the psychology of African women, I am not going to project a radical feminist position. Why? Because the concepts, the philosophy, the perspective of feminist psychology is antagonistic, opposed to the philosophical foundation that I want to talk about here today. I wanted to get that kind of clear. Okay, now, you all know what psychology is, and since the time is limited, I'm not, well actually I do want to read you the definition, because there are some points that I want to emphasize here. This is Linda Marks in her book defines psychology as saying, we all know, in undergraduate school they tell you that psychology is the study of behavior, right? We seek to answer 5 questions and we want to understand why people behave the way they do. But there's another aspect of it. Psychology coming from the Greek words psyche and logos. Psychic meaning spirit, breath, principle of life, soul, or mind. Now, of course, when you study in your textbook, you see no reference to spirit or soul, right? It's the mind only. The mind-body dichotomy that is very well known in neurocentric psychology. But Linda also goes on to say that logos means reason, that is the controlling principle of the universe, or divine wisdom manifest in the creation, government, and redemption of the world. Okay, that's a slightly different definition of psychology than we get from intro to psychology, personality, or social psychology. Now, I'm very happy to be here this evening, and I'm happy and proud and honored to be on this panel. It's quite appropriate for us to be having this discussion during Women's History Month, and I actually want to thank Nancy Oley. She chased me down for about 3 months to get me on this panel, so that is important. It is appropriate for us to be talking about Afrocentric psychology because it is time for us to move beyond discussion of, we do have to recognize Racism is institutionalized. It exists. Every institution in the United States is racist. Everyone, we know that. Inherent in every field is a core of racism. We know this. But it is important for us to now move beyond this kind of reactive stance that we always get into, you know, racism, we react. And let's start moving in towards a more proactive stance. We need to start designing, theorizing, and conceptualizing from a position that we can use and take out and help our sisters and brothers. So that's why we're going to talk about the Afrocentric perspective here. Now, as women, we know, and as women of African descent, we know that the psyche of women is not understood. If European American women have it hard, we have it triply so, or maybe 4 times as hard, because we have to deal with all the other aspects of economic and so forth and so on. So again, it's important for us to look at some kinds of theoretical standards that we need to take. In order to talk about, before I talk about Afrocentric philosophy, I want to say a few things about the Eurocentric bias in psychology, and not to belabor a point, but remember, psychology is a very young field, right? It's a young field, and it grew up, well, let's put it this way, organized European American psychology. People say, well, how come the only psychology that we ever hear about is European American psychology? Well, that's a whole nother lecture. Don't think, however, that people in other parts of the world did not seek to answer the question of how and why people behave the way they do. Those questions are handled within the context for those of us who have our ancestors from Africa. Those questions are dealt with within the context of our philosophy and religion. Okay, so yes, indeed, our ancestors have always been concerned with how and the why of interactions and behavior. But organized European American psychology, we have to remember that it grew up during a time when Europe was doing what? Wreaking havoc all over the world, dominating, plundering. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Walter Rodney's book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. I'll just refer you to that so that I don't have to get stuck in that discussion. But at the time that Europe was expanding itself and becoming a huge power by moving beyond its border to control some so-called enemy and to take not just I don't want to think just one part of Europe in general. At that time, the intellectual circles in Europe were having discussions about the nature of human experience. I was telling my students last night that if you look at historical moments, because we have to understand everything within a historical context. Even here in the United States, when there was a big social, economic crisis, there was also a simultaneous intellectual struggle that was going on. I don't know how many of you know what I'm talking about when I say the Depression. During the Depression, what was going on in Harlem? Weren't there big intellectual debates taking place in the 20s and 30s? Zora Neale Hurston was a part of that. Okay, so at the time that Europe was doing all of this economic and political and social, making these moves, psychology was growing up. So we have a perspective, I'm cutting out a lot this time. We have a perspective here of a continent moving beyond its borders, dealing with economic issues, political issues, control, domination. Now, we have to understand that those issues were not just economic issues. They were not just political issues. Certainly the human psyche came to play there. Because if you're talking about a group of people dominating, controlling, plundering, killing, and so forth and so on, we have to realize that there is a individual psychic kind of component that goes along. So that's the context for European American psychology. It's not a trivial point, because if we understand that perspective, then we understand why European American psychology is based on the values of what? Of European middle class, quote, unquote, male, right? Of that perspective. The idea here is that the European middle class male perspective became reified and then generalized to explain the experience of everyone else in the whole wide world. That's it, sort of in a nutshell. That's the perspective that, you know, European American psychology grew up in. Now, what that means is that there are several biases. There are several Eurocentric biases that are inherent in European American psychology. And I'll just quickly run through a couple of them so that we can have a little basis here to talk about. One is, because see, if we're saying that European American psychology does not answer or cannot deal with diversity, does not know how to address our needs as people of African descent, we need to understand why. So here are some of the biases that are inherent in Eurocentric. These are Eurocentric biases that are inherent in European American psychology. One is the whole control prediction bias. When you get to that point, when you're really immersed in psychology, control. When I was designing my dissertation, I interviewed 100 students, children of African descent, and someone on my committee, well-meaning liberal person, well-meaning, not a horrible person at all, said to me, "Oh, it would have so much more validity, and you'd be able to predict so much more if you had another control group." I had no control group. I looked at children who attended Afrocentric schools, and I compared them with children who were attending the regular public integrated schools. I wanted to look at some very specific things, rules and like that. So I had no, quote, control group. So this individual was saying to me, you should have a control group. And what control group do you think he meant? Right. People of European origin. You see, so there's sort of a notion in psychology that unless you are, you have this control that somehow brings in their perspective that what you're doing has no validity. But it goes beyond that. It goes beyond that. When you look at the 5 things that psychology seeks to answer and the 5 questions that psychology grapples with, you may kind of bristle when you see control as being one of them, and rightly you should. Because control in that sense also means keeping in mind the status quo. And prediction, of course, reflects on an anxiety that Eurocentric philosophy has with the future. Okay, another Eurocentric bias in psychology is this tendency to think that you have to reduce every single thing to its smallest little part in order to understand it, that you have to break everything down, as opposed to, we, from an Afrocentric perspective, think of looking at things in its whole context. But, if you look at this reductionist position, sometimes it means even trying to break down human behavior to its most fundamental animal components. So they compare little white rats, and then they, generalize some comments, some conclusions based on what the white rats do. And Country wrote a very nice poem that the rat was white. Okay, so that's a reductionist bias. Another bias, which gives us a great deal of trouble, and certainly as a clinician, I'm very interested in this, the bias that stability and homeostasis and equilibrium is a more desirable state. That things need to be stable and, balanced and, equilibrium. Well, not so. You see, the reason that bias is a problem for us is because when it comes to people of African descent, folks political people get very upset if you're in too much turmoil, if you're in too much conflict, if you're raging, if you're out of control, if you're asking too many questions, if you're, if you're in too much flux. You see, that bias is very counter to the bias that we as Afrocentric people, not the bias, but the perspective that we hold. Why? Because for us, we believe that the way that you can grow and overcome contradiction is by looking at conflict. Conflict is great. I love it. I love it when people that I work with are in a little bit of an uproar, a little tension, a little anxiety. Because it gives you something to move beyond. I'm not afraid of my clients, or whatever you want to call them, being in conflict. Being a process. You see, the Afrocentric perspective, we view people as being this kind of, dynamic process. This, that, okay. Another, I think those probably will be the major ones that I'll touch on now. Now, I don't want you to think that every single person who is a European American psychologist hold, negative views. We know that the teachings of some of the humanistic psychologists, not all of them, are a little bit more applicable to the worldview that we as people of African descent hold. And certainly many of the self-psychologists, but that's another discussion. So let's talk about the foundation of Afrocentric psychology. Afrocentric psychology is based on the foundation of African philosophy, African ethics, okay? And the idea here for Afrocentric philosophy is, the definition would be the understanding, the attitude of mind, logic, and perception behind the manner in which African people, and that means all of us, regardless of how far removed we are, the manner in which African people think, act, or speak in different situations of life. Now that paragraph is central to the definition of Afrocentric philosophy. Also central to this understanding is the idea of the collective unconscious. Let me tell you something about Carl Jung. You see, he's a contradiction for us. He has some nice thoughts and some nice theories, but the man was a racist. And one of the racist things that Mr. Jung, there are many things, but I don't want to repeat them because, racism doesn't speak so much. But one of the things that's a problem for us is that Carl Jung did not believe that we had a collective unconscious. Think about that, okay? But central to the idea of Afrocentric philosophy is the notion of a collective unconscious. And the collective unconscious speaks to a spiritual predisposition. It also answers the question of cultural retention. I'm going to tell you another story, and I'm going to try not to tell too many stories in the interest of time, but in 1985, there was an international women's conference in Nairobi, Kenya. And there was a delegation that went here from the Women's Center along with the International Council of African Women. And one day we were having a discussion on the grounds of the University of Nairobi, some sisters of African descent, some sisters from the continent, African sisters from the motherland, and other sisters of African descent from throughout the diaspora. We were sitting on the ground having this discussion. Now we had already decided that this was going to be a gathering for Africana women. So along comes a woman who is a well-known European-American feminist. And she saw some of us, and she's used to being in feminist circles, so she started to come over and sit down. Some people said, oh no, excuse me, this is for African women only. And, but she didn't understand, so I said, no, this is for African women only. And the woman said to me, Gwen, you are no more African than I am. Now to me, I tell that story a lot because when she said it, all of these sisters from the continent, they were sort of shocked. Everybody was shocked. And here we were in Africa, and here was this European-American woman telling me that I was no more African than she was. But guess what? She's not the only one that would hold that position. Because you see, we forget about the concept of cultural retention, which is very fundamental to our understanding here of African philosophy. You see, the idea is that no matter how removed we are from the continent, there still exists within us traits and ways and attitudes, some of which are unconscious, that reflect our African heritage. And we could try to get away from it as much as we can, but as Dr. Noble said, if you really look, you can find it. Okay, now, we also need to talk about the collective consciousness. Noble describes the collective consciousness as a vital attitude, a kind of faith in a transcendent force, a sense of vital solidarity. The philosophy that we're talking about, when we talk about Afrocentric philosophy, you notice I'm not talking about Afrocentric philosophy. Why? Because I'm taking it out of the realm of the African-American experience only. Most people, when they talk about Afrocentric philosophy, they're basing it starting with slavery. Well, I began before slavery. We all began before slavery. So when we talk about Afrocentric philosophy, we're also talking about African religion. Why? Because both answer questions having the storytelling conference. And the reason that it was important on many levels, one of the reasons that it was so important was that it did specifically this. It elevated the level of oral tradition and provided a basis for us within the intellectual community to look at the significance of our oral traditions. So if you really wanted to understand us as a people of African descent, we would need to be familiar with the myths and the proverbs. And if we had time, I would get every person in this group to come up with a proverb or something that your grandmother or your grandfather told you that is a direct reflection of your African culture. Now, there are several, some of you might be thinking, well, how could she know? She's talking about African philosophy. Africa is a big continent, and there are a million tribes, and each tribe has its own philosophy. To a certain extent, that is true, but we have to, as Noble says, we have to move beyond the concept of all the things that divide us and look at the commonalities, even in African philosophy and African religion. What are some of the substance, in other words, is not different. There is a traditional African kind of basis, foundation in terms of philosophy and religion. Now, the idea here is that what people